A soldier comes home from a campaign carrying more than he has ever owned, not earned over years, carried on his back, in a single afternoon, out of a city that is no longer standing, metal and cloth and whatever else would fit. He did not steal it by the rules of his world. It was the wage of a war he was sent to fight. He is not lazy. He is not a criminal. He is a man who, this morning, has more than his father accumulated in a lifetime. Give it 2 years. The ancient record is remarkably consistent about where that wealth goes, and it does not go into a lasting estate. It moves again, usually toward whoever was better organized, and the soldier who carried it home is, more often than not, roughly back where he started, except that now he has been rich, which is a harder place to stand than never having been. 3,000 years before anyone had a word for what happened to him, a scribe wrote the pattern down in a single line. It is in Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 11. And the translation you have probably heard is arguably reading it wrong, not by a little, but at the very first word. Here is what almost everyone assumes it says, that this is a verse about dishonest money, ill-gotten gain, money that came from somewhere it should not have. Every sermon on it goes there eventually, and most translations quietly help it along. But look at what the sentence actually contains. Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. No theft, no fraud, no deception, no accusation of any kind. Nobody in that sentence has done anything wrong. Not the soldier, not anyone. The verse names a way that money arrives and a way that money leaves, and it puts them next to each other without a single moral term in between, which makes the line considerably more uncomfortable than the version everyone remembers. Because if it were about stolen money, most people could set it down immediately. It is not about stolen money. It describes a pattern that applies to money that came honestly, and we are going to read what the scribe actually wrote, including the one word inside it that scholars still argue about. A scribe would not ask you how much you have. That is the wrong question, and it was the wrong question 3,000 years ago too. An inventory that records quantity and nothing else is an inventory that tells you almost nothing about whether the quantity will still be there next year. He would ask one question instead, and it is the question this whole episode is about. How long did it take to arrive? Not where it came from, not what you did to get it. How long? Because the records a scribe kept were not lists of amounts. They were lists of amounts with dates attached, and a man who has spent decades reading dated entries develops an instinct that a man reading a single total never develops. He learns that two identical figures behave completely differently depending on the shape of the line that produced them. A herd built over 15 years and a herd of the same size acquired in one season are not the same herd. They will not be managed the same way. They will not survive the same drought. And the difference is not in the animals. 2 weeks ago, the assignment was one sheet of paper with a column on it. Last week, it got a second column. Keep it. It has one more thing to tell you, and it is not on either column. It is in the dates you did not write down. So start with the world the verse came from, because fast money was not a modern invention, and the writer had specific examples in front of him. The soldier who opened this episode was only one of them. The fastest money in the ancient world moved by sea. A trading voyage was an enormous bet. A merchant committed capital, crew, vessel, and cargo to a route that took months or years, and the outcome was binary in a way that almost nothing on land was binary. The ship returned, or it did not. If it returned, the return was not incremental. It arrived all at once, in a single afternoon, at a single port, in quantities that no farming season could produce. The record of Solomon's own kingdom describes exactly this kind of arrangement. A fleet operating in partnership, voyages measured in years rather than seasons, and cargo lists that read like a catalogue of things that do not grow in Israel: gold, silver, ivory, exotic animals. That is state-scale speculation, and the profile of the return is the profile this verse is describing. Nothing, 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 and then everything, in one day. The second source was faster still, and it was war. Spoil arrived without any accumulation phase whatsoever. A campaign succeeded, and the wealth of a city changed hands in an afternoon. Metal, livestock, stores, labor. The men who carried it home had built no capacity for holding it, because there had been no interval during which capacity could have been built. And the ancient record is fairly consistent about what happened to that wealth afterwards. It moved again, quickly, usually in the direction of whoever was better organized. The third was the harvest gamble, and it was the one ordinary people played. A farmer who guessed correctly about which crop would be scarce could clear more in one season than in the previous 10. It happened. It was legal. It required no dishonesty at all, only a guess about weather and demand that turned out to be right. None of these three is theft. That matters, because the verse does not exclude them. Everyone fits inside the sentence exactly as written. Now watch what happens around a person to whom that kind of money arrives. The sailor, the soldier, the farmer who guessed right. The cost of this pattern is not primarily financial, and every one of those three men met the same thing when they got home. The first thing that happens is that the number of people with a claim on you increases. Not legal claims, moral ones. A man whose situation improves slowly is surrounded by people who watched it improve, who understand roughly what it took, and whose expectations adjusted at the same speed his circumstances did. A man whose situation changes suddenly is surrounded by people whose expectations did not adjust at all. They simply jumped, in one movement, to the new number. And they are not being unreasonable. From the outside, a sudden increase looks like surplus, because from the outside, there is no visible evidence of the effort that would normally have accompanied it. Nobody sees a 15-year climb. Everybody sees a single event. The second thing that happens is that refusing becomes a statement. Before, when there was nothing to give, saying no was simply a fact about the world. After, saying no is a decision about the person asking. It means something, and the man in that position discovers that he is now making dozens of small judgments about people he loves, on a subject he has no training in, under conditions where every answer damages something. The third thing, and this is the one the ancient world would have recognized instantly, is that the arrangements made in that period are almost all made at the beginning, which is precisely when the least is understood. Decisions get made in the first months, when the situation is newest, and the person in it knows the least about what he is holding, and those decisions, in a world without any mechanism for undoing them, tended to be permanent. So the environment around the money changes first, faster than the money does, and largely outside the control of the person it happened to, which is why the losing so rarely feels like a decision. By the time a decision is visible, the ground has already moved. Now the word, which is where this gets genuinely interesting. The Hebrew term standing behind vanity in most English versions of this verse is one of the most heavily loaded words in the entire corpus. Its literal sense is vapor, breath, the visible cloud you exhale on a cold morning, which is real, which you can see, and which is gone before you finish looking at it. It is the same word that opens the book of Ecclesiastes, where it is repeated until it becomes the whole thesis of the book, and where translators have argued about it for centuries, precisely because vanity carries a moral flavor in English that the Hebrew does not obviously carry. Vapor is not wicked. Vapor is simply not durable. So on one reading, this verse says nothing about how the money was obtained. It says something about what kind of thing it was. Wealth of the vapor sort. Wealth that had the properties of breath on a cold morning, visible, genuine, and structurally temporary. But here is the part almost nobody mentions. The manuscript tradition is not unanimous on that word. The Hebrew text that most English translations follow reads vapor. Other ancient witnesses to the text appear to have read something closer to haste. which is why a number of modern translations render the line as wealth gained hastily rather than wealth gained by vanity. This is not a small difference. Under one reading, the verse is about the nature of the wealth. Under the other, it is about the speed of its arrival. They point in similar directions, which is probably why the disagreement has never been urgent, but they are not the same claim. This channel is not going to tell you which reading is correct, because that is a live question among people who work on the text professionally, and the honest position is that both readings have manuscript support and serious defenders. What we can tell you is that the two readings converge on the same observation, from different directions, and that the convergence is more interesting than either reading alone. And while we are inside the vocabulary, the second half of the verse deserves the same attention, because it is handled even more loosely in translation. Most English versions render it as gathering by labor, which puts the whole emphasis on effort, how hard the man worked, how much he sweated for it. But the Hebrew phrase behind that is more literally about the hand, gathering by hand, or upon the hand, an image of accumulation in handfuls. That is not primarily a statement about the intensity of the work. It is a statement about the size of each increment, small quantities, repeatedly, over a long time, which changes the contrast the verse is actually drawing. It is not the lazy man against the hard-working one. The book has plenty of verses for that comparison, and uses them without hesitation. Here the opposition is between two rates of arrival, one quantity that shows up complete, and many small quantities that show up one at a time. Read that way, both halves of the line are about speed, and nothing else. No judgment of character in either direction. Two different shapes of the same curve, and an observation about which shape tends to still be there afterwards. So what did the writer see? Here is one way to organize it. This is a reading, not a claim the text makes in these terms. There is a threshold, somewhere, at which an amount of money stops behaving like money and starts behaving like a problem. Below that threshold, money does what people expect it to do. It sits there. It gets spent or it does not. The decisions it requires are decisions the holder already knows how to make, because he has been making that size of decision his whole life. Above the threshold, the amount begins to generate its own obligations. It requires decisions the holder has never made before, about structure, about people, about time horizons he has never had to think about. It attracts attention. It creates a category of question that did not previously exist in his life, and it creates them faster than he can develop answers. The threshold is not a fixed number. It is different for every person, and this is the entire point. The threshold sits exactly where a person's existing capacity ends, which is why the verse pairs the two halves the way it does, because the other half of the sentence describes a man who gathers little by little, and what the text says about him is not that he is more virtuous, it says he increases. Think about what happens to a man during a slow climb. Every increase in what he holds arrives after he has already handled the increase before it. His capacity and his holdings rise together, in step, and the gap between them never opens very far. He learns to manage a slightly larger amount while managing a slightly larger amount. There is no moment at which he is holding something he has never held. Whereas the man whose wealth arrives at once is holding a quantity his experience has never had to manage, and the gap between what he has and what he knows how to do with it is at its absolute maximum on day one, which is precisely when the most decisions get made. That is the whole mechanism, if it is a mechanism. Not a punishment, not a curse on the money. A gap between an amount and a capacity, opened suddenly, at the worst possible moment. And the thing about that capacity, knowing what a bad month looks like before you are in one, knowing what you personally do when a number gets large, knowing which people ask because they need and which ask because you have, is that none of it can be acquired by reading about it. It is acquired the way the second half of the verse describes, in handfuls, over time, at a scale where being wrong is survivable. That is what the slow climb produces, and it is the only thing it produces that the sudden arrival does not. Hold that question for a second, because we are going to ask you about it at the end, and the honest answers in the comments on this one tend to be the best part. Which brings the principle down to whatever is in front of you. Here is the line the scribe saw, and the translation half buried. Capacity is built during the climb, not after it. The slow accumulation the verse praises is not being praised for being slow, it is being described as the one interval during which the person becomes someone who can hold the result. Speed is not the problem in itself. Speed is a problem because it skips the stretch of time in which the holder would otherwise have been changing. And it means the risk is not really about the money at all. It is about the distance between the size of what arrives and the size of what the person has previously handled, which is a distance that can be closed deliberately, slowly, on purpose, before there is anything at stake. Now the part that has to be said carefully, because a careless version of this teaching does real damage. This verse is not a law of physics, and it does not predict anyone's future. Proverbs is wisdom literature. Its characteristic move is to state the general shape of things, what tends to happen, what usually follows what, in short lines built for memory. It is not making a claim about every individual case, and reading it that way produces conclusions the text does not support. So it does not say that everyone who receives money quickly will lose it. Plenty of people receive an inheritance, or a settlement, or the proceeds of selling something they built, and handle it carefully for the rest of their lives. The verse describes a frequent pattern. It does not describe a guaranteed one, and it names no individual. It also says nothing about whether fast money is legitimate. Nothing at all. A business that succeeds suddenly after years of preparation, an inheritance from someone who loved you, compensation you were owed. None of these are condemned anywhere in this line, and the corpus is not suspicious of gain as such. The same collection speaks approvingly of profit, of increase, of the value of work that produces more than it consumes. And it is worth stopping on one case in particular, because someone is already thinking of it. Somebody watching this knows a man who built something for a decade with his own hands and then sold it in a single afternoon for more than he had made in all 10 years combined. The money arrived as fast as any lottery, and he did not lose it. He was fine. That case does not break the verse. It is the verse. Because the 10 years were the climb. By the time the sudden payment landed, that man had already become someone who could hold that size of number. He had made 10 years of decisions at a scale that rose gradually toward it. The check arrived all at once. The capacity did not. It had been arriving the whole time, in handfuls, exactly as the second half of the line describes, which is the precise distinction the verse is drawing, and the reason it is not a warning against wealth. The speed of the payment is not what the text is measuring. The speed of the learning is. When the learning has already happened, the sudden arrival is only a formality. When it has not, the sudden arrival is the whole problem. Same check, different man holding it. And there is the manuscript question we already looked at, which is worth restating here rather than burying. The first word of this verse is genuinely disputed between witnesses to the text, vapour or haste. We do not resolve it because it is not ours to resolve, and a channel that pretends the question is settled in order to make a cleaner argument has traded something more valuable than a clean argument. So here is this week's assignment, and it is closer to the sheet than last week's was. Take every amount of money that entered your account in the last 30 days. Beside each one, write a single date, the day you began working for it. For most entries, the two dates sit close together. A month's wages arrives after a month of work, 30 days of distance, and that is normal. That is the second half of the verse, money gathered by the hand. Write those and move on. But some entries will have a large gap, or no honest date at all. A bonus that landed in a day, a gift, an inheritance, a windfall, a refund, a sum that arrived far faster than any work behind it. Mark those ones differently. Underline them, star them, whatever you like, because those are the entries this verse is about, and seeing them separated from the rest on the same page tells you something a total never will. That is the whole task. You are not deciding anything about that money. You are only dating it. Because the one piece of information that predicts how an amount behaves, the gap between when the work started and when the money arrived, is the exact piece of information that no bank statement records and almost nobody writes down. For anything you actually decide to do with money, particularly a large or sudden amount, sit down with a licensed professional who can see your real situation before you make arrangements you cannot undo. The first months are when the least is understood and the most gets decided. That is not our opinion. That is the pattern the whole verse is about. A single line, two halves, no accusation anywhere in it, and a first word that scholars still argue about. So the question for the comments is not about the number, because the number never taught anyone anything. It is this: think of the fastest money you have ever received. Now imagine you could go back and delay its arrival by exactly 1 year. Same amount, same source, just 12 months later. What would you do with that year to be ready for it? Be specific, because the specific answers on this subject are always the ones that teach somebody else reading. And if the honest answer is that it arrived exactly the way this verse describes and behaved exactly the way this verse describes, say that too. That answer helps most of all. Tell us. We read them. And if you have noticed that we keep telling you which parts of this we cannot confirm, the disputed word, the manuscript question, the things marked as uncertain rather than smoothed over, that is not caution. That is the format. Subscribe if that is the version of this subject you have been looking for. Because there is a second verse in this book about speed, and it does something stranger than this one. It sets haste against a word that almost everyone translates as hard work, and the word does not mean hard work at all. It never did. Almost every version of that verse in English gets read the wrong way round. That is where we go next.